Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the September 2017 PASS Women in Technology virtual group meeting. We have a little bit to go through today before we get to Andrea. I want to thank Century One. They have signed on to be our virtual group sponsor for the second year, and they could have been before that, but I've only run it for 2 years. So at the end of the broadcast, I'll be reaching out to one of the attendees today to give them a $50 gift card to Amazon, courtesy of Century One. You can always find PassWit on YouTube. All of our sessions are recorded and uploaded. This one will be as well. Check out our homepage for upcoming events, wit.sequelpass.org or wit.pass.org, since they reorg. If you're not a member of the virtual chapter already, I would encourage you to join and sign up to get our monthly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at @pass_Twitter, or follow the PassWit hashtag. Or if you'd like to share some information with us that you think would be interesting, feel free to tweet at using the PassWit hashtag. If you're thinking of attending Pass Summit and haven't signed up yet, it's not too late. You can sign up and get $150 off using the PassWit discount code. And if anybody needs that, just reach out to me or the PassWit at Twitter, and we'll get that for you. Let me fix my screen really quickly. So we have a few SQL Saturdays coming up. And as I was prepping this slide deck, and as I was prepping all of the tweets that I send out in preparation for all of these, I called it an embarrassment of riches. While we're still not at parity with women speakers, I am greatly impressed at the job both organizers and women speakers have done with submitting or reaching out to find more women speakers, mentoring other speakers, encouraging people to become a speaker. So these are all just this month at these sessions everywhere. Tracy Baggiano did mention that I'm going to get sick of tweeting about her over the next 4 weeks because she's doing so many sessions. And I said never. I'll never get sick of tweeting about female speakers. So we have some great sessions coming up in October. Kellen Gorman is going to be doing the power in the simple act of doing. She is at DBA Kevlar on Twitter. If you don't already follow her, you may want to give that a shot. I will be presenting Let Her Finish, Supporting Women's Voices in IT, November 15th. Julie Smith is going to do our session in December. She may not do her Heck and Sweet Reports session, but it'll be on a BI-related topic, I'm sure. And Monica Rathburn, who is SQL Espresso, will be doing her Surviving as a Lone DBA for us in January. Today we have Andrea, and he's assertive, she's aggressive, recognizing patterns of unconscious bias. She has a couple of videos that we don't think you're going to be able to hear. We'll give it a shot. If not, we'll make sure that you have the link to it so you can check them out later if that's what you want. And with that, Andrea, if you're ready to go, I will make you presenter. And I'll mute my mic once I get this. But let me go ahead and share with you guys, if anybody has any questions during the session, if you want to just put those in the window, and I'll either ask Andrea when it's appropriate, or we'll hold it till the end, depending on what the question is. So, Andrea, I'm going to go ahead and let you go.
All right. Thanks, Ree. I'm really excited to be here. Today I'm going to talk to you all about common patterns of bias in the workplace and some practical steps that you can do to interrupt those bias patterns. First of all, some caveats. By no means am I an expert in this field. The ideas that I'll be presenting are based on my personal experiences, opinions, things that I've read, and your mileage may vary. So why discuss gender bias in the first place? There's a huge body of research on bias going back over the last 50 years. Gender inequality has been clearly documented over and over again. And there's a bunch of staggering statistics up here on the screen. According to the US Census Bureau, for 2016, the pay gap for women was 20%. In other words, women earned 80 cents on every dollar a man earned. And the ratios are even worse when you're a woman of color. Even though that today more than half of college grads are women, only 18% of CS degrees are going to women. And then obviously there's all the unpleasantness that seems to be coming up in the news all the time, like James Damore and his Google memo and Travis Kalanick and all the toxic masculinity at Uber. So improving these numbers is going to be a challenge, and tech culture prides itself on being a meritocracy. However, research shows that when an organization's core values say that raises are based entirely on the performance of the employee, in other words, a meritocracy, women are more likely to get smaller bonuses than men with equivalent performance reviews. So obviously there's some sort of subtle biases against women going on here. And what social science is showing is that these biases are continue to be perpetuated unless they're intentionally interrupted. So people who think that they're working in a meritocracy are less likely to interrupt them because they think everything's okay. Right now, a lot of times the standard approach is token hires or sensitivity training or initiatives that focus on changing the woman. But the thing is that when an organization lacks diversity, it's not the employees that need to be fixed, it's the process and the business. So as I talk about the various interrupters, I will be talking about what women can do, but also what you can do organizationally. So today I'm going to be talking about 4 patterns of bias that women commonly encounter. They're discussed in great detail in a book called What Works for Women at Work by Joan C. Williams. I have a link to the book at the end of my slide deck. The four patterns that I'll be talking about are Prove It Again, which is about how women have to work harder than men to establish equal competence. The Tightrope, which is about when a woman acts too feminine, she's liked but not respected. But if a woman acts too masculine, she's respected but not liked. The Maternal Wall is negative assumptions about a woman's competence and her commitment to her job after she becomes a mother. And then finally, Tug of War is when gender bias is pitting women against one another. I'll be providing examples of bias interrupters for each of these patterns. So a bias interrupter is essentially an intervention that can change the process, the system, whatever, that perpetuates these patterns, and it can help stop the bias in its tracks. And what's really great about a lot of the ones that I'm proposing today is that you can apply them without directly drawing attention to the bias. Big cultural change initiatives, sensitivity training can be really effective, but they're also really in your face, which creates tension and resistance from the people that would benefit from the training the most. All right. So first of all, stereotypes. Stereotypes are oversimplified opinions or assumptions. When we're talking about gender stereotypes, that means a person might hold different expectations for women and men regarding their behaviors or their career choices or their just natural inclinations. Gender stereotypes are coming from historical and cultural beliefs about the roles of women and men in society. They're established early in life and constantly reinforced by a person's cultural experiences. So they're something that is social, not necessarily an issue just with the individual. And it's important to point out that gender stereotypes affect men just as much as they affect women. There's a social penalty when a man is deviating from masculine ideals. And so that creates a pressure to behave possibly in an exaggerated, hyper-aggressive manner. And, you know, think of the programmer culture in Silicon Valley and where those pressures to act like that might be coming from. So implicit bias. We've been taught to call these behaviors unconscious bias, implicit bias, but it might be better to call it automatic bias. So what does that really mean? When we're in an environment, our brains are going to automatically process what's going on around us. And if we don't have all the information, we're going to draw on those stereotypes to fill in the gaps. Stereotypes affect our responses and assumptions in those situations, even when we consciously disagree with them. For example, for me, I'm really afraid of dogs, like to an embarrassing level. I'm afraid of dogs. And consciously, I know that most dogs are properly trained, they're well behaved, they're the sweetest things ever. My coworker Dan tells the greatest stories about his German Shepherd and the shenanigans he gets into. I love watching the Puppy Bowl way more than I like watching real football. But despite all of this, I once sprained my ankle trying to step out of the way of a dog that was walking towards me. My automatic response to a perfectly calm dog on a leash was to freak out and trip on a crack in the ground. My lizard brain said, uh-oh, unknown dog, biting machine, and without realizing it, I did something stupid to get out of a situation that wasn't even a problem in the first place. Likewise, when you have other biases, say a gender bias, that can be a powerful impact on your behavior. It can influence like your judgment of someone and how well you think they're going to be fit in a job, in a field. It can shift what kind of salaries you offer to job candidates. It can change what level of respect you think is appropriate to give others in the workplace. So it's something that you really want to be conscious about. The important thing to remember is that stereotype activation is automatic, but stereotype application can be controlled. If I know more about what my biases are, how they work, then I can address them effectively. It's sort of the first step to hacking around those stereotypes that I don't want to apply in my day-to-day life. Like for example, with the dogs, if I'm visiting my friend's house and they have a dog, when I get in the door, I try to be very mindful. I come in and I'll just stand really still and let the dog smell my legs and just focus on my breathing. And usually that's enough for the dog, and then it just walks away. And so it's a positive experience, or at least not a negative experience for me. And then the next time the dog comes by, I'm a lot less freaked out until I finally am at a place where, oh, I can pet a dog. And that's pretty great because dogs are great. They really are. And it's so silly that I respond this way. So a great place to check on your personal biases is Harvard's Project Implicit. I have a link to that at the end of the slide deck as well. It's just a bunch of questions and surveys that you can take for a variety of biases, not just gender, but race and LGBT and disability and things like that. Before I move on, are there any questions, Ree?
Not so far.
Okay, cool. All right, first bias, prove it again. So women have to perform better than men to be seen as equally competent. 2/3 of women surveyed reported that they have to prove themselves over and over again, that their success is discounted and their expertise is questioned at every turn. So this comes from a perceived lack of fit. When you think IT professional, a developer, a DBA, a sysadmin, the automatic image in your mind is probably white guy, glasses, beard, maybe. So women have to provide a lot more evidence because they don't fit that stereotype. My favorite quote that kind of describes what Prove It Again feels like is, Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in high heels. That's definitely what it feels like to me some days. Prove It Again is a descriptive bias, meaning that people are getting characterized based on stereotypes about their genders, not based on their merits or their actual behaviors. And so the problem arises because stereotypes don't match reality all the time. So people have an unconscious stereotype that men are going to be better at, whatever, fill in the blank, science, development, management, whatever. And so the natural response is to remember, notice information that reinforces the stereotypes you already have, and then overlook and forget information that contradicts the stereotype. So basically dismiss it as a one-off and, don't store it in your head. And that's why women have to provide so much more evidence of their competence. You see this in how men and women are often held to different standards or discussed differently when evaluated. This can apply to whether or not a candidate meets job requirements, or whether or not you leniently or strictly enforce a policy or a rule. So, for example, conversations about promotion or hiring. So when people are talking about a guy, they might say, "Oh, he reminds me of myself. He has the whole package." First of all, there are packages that women just don't have. But second of all, language like this is sort of a form of in-group favoritism. It's a bias towards men, not necessarily a bias against women. It's just people want to be around people that are just like them. When you're talking about a woman who's a candidate, the conversations are often framed like, you've probably heard this, are probably framed like, first, sorry, she needs to have a proven track record. There's a statistic that men apply for a job when they meet 40% of the qualification, 60% of the qualifications, but women apply only if they meet all of them. When I first heard that, I thought it was just guys being cocky and overconfident, but really gender-based assumptions are clashing with the requirements of a role. And so when it's harder to visualize somebody's potential, it's harder to say, oh, you meet 80% of the requirements. I can see how you'll meet the rest. So how do you combat this? There's different bias interrupters that you can apply depending on what your role is in the situation. Like, if you feel your peers are getting preferential treatment, you might say something to your boss like, can you give me an example of what I need to do in order to get the same opportunity as person X? If you're a colleague or a manager, and this comes up in a conversation where people are saying something harsh about a woman, you might say, so how is this situation different than when a very similar situation for person X happened? Organizationally, you should choose objectives and metrics up front when you're doing your hiring and your performance reviews, and you should make sure that they're applied consistently, and figure out why exceptions are made when they're made. So this is one of the videos that I wanted to show. It's basically a bunch of people interrupting each other or interrupting women. You can see Rand Paul shushing the TV commentator. Basically, Manterruption is when a man's talking over a woman. Studies show that women in mixed groups interrupt others a lot less, and men interrupt women a lot less than women interrupt men. What you want to do is have a no Kanye rule, no interruptions, or if you can't institute that, you don't have the power to do that, maybe interrupt the interrupter. So if they start interrupting, you can say something like, oh, I'm sorry, it sounded like X was trying to say something. Can you let them finish? And then the other way you could approach it is just have an offline conversation with the person and say, hey, you probably don't realize this, but you're interrupting people all the time. Can you like be on the lookout for that behavior? Another common behavior is what I like to call bro-appropriation. It's when a man gets credit for an idea that a woman shared maybe earlier in the conversation. This one happens a lot to me. I'll tell a colleague something offhand. It might not even be technical. One time I told this colleague, this professor in the news is known for doing really epic pranks. And the next day it came up in a different conversation. And he said to me, did you know that this professor does epic pranks? And I was just thinking to myself, yeah, because I told you about the time that he trolled Bill Clinton in a robot suit. I was the one who just told you that yesterday.
So, Andrea, I'm gonna interrupt at this point. So you said that you thought that to yourself. What happens when you look at him and say, yes, I told you that yesterday?
Yeah, it depends. You know, I try a couple different tactics because I know he doesn't know he's doing it because he does this to other people, like including men. So, but sometimes I'll say, yeah, because I was there. or yes, because I'm the one who implemented that change, or, you know, whatever. Sometimes I do say yes. I correct the guy and say, hey, no, that was me doing something, or that was my idea, or I just said that, 10 minutes ago. But I feel like you have to pick your battles, it depends on how trivial it is. For me, it depends on, whether or not I feel like it matters that people know that, no, really, that was my idea. That was something that I did or I said. So one approach that you can take to when you are bro-appropriated, I don't know if that's the word you'd use, is something that women in the Obama administration were doing. It's called amplification. And so women were noticing that they weren't getting heard enough or their ideas were being stolen. So they kind of got together and said, we're going to repeat each other's ideas whenever someone says something and give credit to the woman who said it, so that men are forced to acknowledge these women's contributions. So, you catch someone saying, something that they didn't say, you can go, oh, it's really interesting that you said that. That's the point that so-and-so was making just before. Or you can say, oh, thanks for picking up on my idea. And here's my thought. And then add something new so that you're also forwarding the conversation. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it, depending on the situation. Before I go on to the next bias, is there any other questions?
Not so far.
Okay, cool. So the second bias is the tightrope. It's a prescriptive bias, meaning that it's assumptions about how people should behave. So when a person lists qualities of an effective leader, usually they're thinking of words like assertive, competitive, ambitious. These are stereotypically male traits or masculine traits, but women are expected to be polite and helpful and modest. And so women have to walk this metaphorical tightrope. If you act in a manner that's consistent with your gender stereotypes, you're considered less competent, too soft. And if you act in a manner that's inconsistent with gender stereotypes, you're considered less likable. And so you're too hard. It's kind of a Goldilocks situation. And so this is a really tight space that you have to negotiate. Ellen Powell, in the Kleiner-Perkins discrimination suit, in different parts of the suit, she was described as passive and too quiet at meetings, and in other places that she was entitled and demanding. So which one is it? You know, make up your mind. There's a study called The Sexual Harassment of Uppity Women, which showed that women who are more dominant, they're direct, outspoken, competitive, assertive, instead of being, nice, are more likely to be harassed than women who meet feminine ideals. And so it's really concerning that this bias continues. So stereotypical gender traits. So the stereotypical masculine style is about, influencing peers and supervisors, problem solving, kind of taking charge. And the stereotypically feminine style of leadership is more about supporting and encouraging others, taking care of people. In reality, both styles are equally important, but the prototypical leader uses the masculine style, and the feminine style can often be undervalued or considered unique. And that's kind of a bummer, because a lot of studies are showing that the more feminine leadership style and groups that operate that way are a lot more effective. Unfortunately, I can't play this video either. It's from Saturday Night Live in 2008, and it's basically Palin and Clinton talking about how sexism in the media really, really stinks, and Palin saying things like, "Stop calling me pretty and sexy," and Clinton saying, "Don't say I have cankles," and "Don't call me a harpy." And so, that's kind of the dichotomy, is that people would think Sarah Palin is friendly but dumb, and people think that Hillary Clinton is, mean but really qualified. And so, which would you rather be? Liked but not respected, or respected and not liked? And the tightrope pattern of bias is all about how difficult it is to be both at the same time, which is what everyone should be, liked and respected. So for people who are kind of more on the feminine side, oftentimes you have to deal with a lot of what's called office housework, so the extra organizational tasks. This varies from industry to industry, but it can be actual housework, like planning the parties or getting gifts or cleaning up after a meeting, ordering lunch, or it could be administrative tasks like scheduling the meetings, taking the notes, stuff like that. So office housework is all of these important but low profile things that are going on in the background. And glamour work is all the shiny, cool stuff that gets all the attention and all the praise. At my shop, that the housework might be, updating and validating our backup solution. And the glamour work would be re-architecting our HA setup so that we can use availability groups across our 2 data centers. One is really cool and uses neat technology. One is a big problem if it doesn't get done, but people aren't going to high-five me for doing it. So women do a lot more of the office housework and get less credit for doing it. And they find it's really hard to say no to requests because you want to look like a team player. I have a colleague, she's a team lead in a development team, and she got asked to organize a baby shower for a developer in a completely different team. kind of the cultural norm where I work is that the direct supervisor or manager is the one who's responsible of the employee, is responsible for throwing the baby shower, but he didn't want to do it. And her response was, I'm a programmer. I'm not a party planner. Why would you ask me to do that? I have better things to do. I have .NET code to write. And so eventually the manager realized that she wasn't going to do it, and he had one of the administrative assistants do it. And in this situation, my colleague felt like her time was being undervalued by this manager. You know, if it's something that a secretary could do, why not go to her in the first place? Why ask a developer to take that time away from her schedule? So
I'm gonna break in here, Andrea, and there was a comment that I'll kind of bring into your presentation in the webinar, and that was, and we discussed this the other night when you and I were online, was the concept of stretch goals or stretch projects. And because you're busy doing the making sure backups and everything are going, instead of you're not re-architecting your company's HA, what that means is that you're not assigned to the goal that's going to get you noticed, that's going to get you kudos in the next team or in the next company meeting. Hey, by the way, this big project happened, and Andrea was the lead on that. So because you're being assigned to the housework versus the glamour work, you don't get recognition for your hard work. And that matters at raise time, that matters at review time, that matters the next time a stretch project comes along, that the person who worked on it the last time with great success is likely going to be who gets assigned to the next one as well. So when you're not getting assigned to any of that glamour work, you're not getting noticed by the people that matter at the company.
Absolutely. And so, like, how do you intervene when somebody's doing a disproportionate amount of this housework? So first, you should probably make sure that these housework tasks are getting an appropriate amount of credit. Like, yes, backups aren't sexy, but people would be really mad if they weren't there. When you have new projects coming up, maybe especially if they're predominantly housework projects, don't ask for volunteers. Set up a rotation, divide it up evenly amongst your team. When it's the more literal housework, use support staff if you have it. And try to come up with a strategic no. You know, prioritize your tasks and, you know, say, I'm sorry, I'd really love to work on this boring thing, but if I did that, I couldn't get this more high profile thing done. Why don't you ask X? I think they have capacity. And if you're a manager, just keep tabs on this and back up your employee and say, seriously, this is their priority, and back their strategic no. So on the flip side is the women who are displaying the more masculine traits. So I love this Beyonce quote, "I'm not bossy, I'm the boss." How often do you see a man called bossy? You don't. How about a grown woman? More than you should, that's for sure. There was a survey of women in STEM, and 34% of the women reported feeling pressure to be acting in a more feminine role, and 53% of women actually received backlash for displaying the stereotypically masculine behaviors. And a lot of what it comes down to is that the same behaviors can be perceived completely differently if it's coming from a woman or if it's coming from a man. So he's confident in his abilities, but she's a shameless self-promoter. You know, men are applauded for discussing their successes, but women are told, you're not being modest enough. Just chill out. The title of my session, he's assertive, but she's aggressive. Men are admired for being direct, outspoken, openly ambitious, and those traits are definitely discouraged in women. He's speaking his mind. She really lost it. She freaked out. Expressing anger or frustration, sometimes that actually increases a man's status, but it definitely decreases a woman's status in an organization. There was a study, it involved about 250 performance reviews from men and women, specifically in the tech sector. And about 60% of the reviews received by men got some sort of critical feedback, but 88% of those reviews for women had some kind of critical feedback. So not only do women get more critical feedback, but the quality of the feedback is different. Men usually receive suggestions about, what are skills that you can develop, constructive critical feedback. And women do receive this too, but they also receive criticisms about their personalities. Things about, watch your tone. You need to step back a bit. You need to stop being so judgmental. You need to be less gloomy. So in these reviews, for the 83 critical reviews for men, some kind of personality aspect was brought up twice. For the 94 critical reviews given to women, it happened 71 times. So a vast majority of the negative reviews included something about their personalities. So how do you combat this? No one's completely masculine or completely feminine. We all show different traits at different times. So one good way to approach this is to be more deliberate about when you exhibit your more feminine side or when you exhibit your more masculine qualities. If you're warm and cuddly 99% of the time, then people are going to think that 1% of the time when you have to be tough as necessary for the situation and not a core aspect of your personality. Another thing you can do is kind of be like Taylor Swift and form a posse. You can get a bunch of colleagues together and celebrate your successes as a group. This is something that lifts everybody up together. It's something that's great that you can include male allies on, and it just looks a lot better to be tooting somebody else's horn than tooting your own. Another thing you can do is add softening or qualifying language. So, add things like apparently, probably. I might be wrong, but so these hedging phrases are less assertive and less in your face. And if you're on the feminine side of things, these are probably things you want to take out of your vocabulary. So that's kind of what I have for that. Are there any other questions or comments?
Nope, not right now. We're good.
Okay, cool. The third bias pattern is called the maternal wall. When professional women have kids, their commitment and their competence are questioned and career opportunities start drying up. Sheryl Sandberg talked about this a little bit in Lean In. She said, don't leave before you leave, meaning that women start making decisions that limit their careers even before they have a child. They start leaning back because they might have a child and their career might go like this or that. So here's one stereotype of a working mother, overwhelmed and not productive. Employers and colleagues often assume that a woman's going to lose her drive after she has kids. In one study, women who indicated that they were mothers on a resume were 79% less likely to be hired and received $11,000 less in salary than non-mothers with identical resumes. The only thing that differed in these resumes was one said that she was in the PTA, the other didn't. So mothers are often held to higher performance standards and punctuality standards than non-mothers. And so they feel like they're being pushed out of the workforce or that they're being left behind. For example, a supervisor has a career advancing assignment, one of these push goals. And the mother would be great at it. She has, all of the qualifications. But because it's time consuming, he doesn't even tell the mother about the position. He's like, well, it's too much work. It's too much time. It requires travel, whatever. And it doesn't even become an option for her. And so it's really important that you, if you're a manager, if you're a leader, that you don't make assumptions about what working mothers want. Instead, you should ask. You could say something like, you'd be really great at this stretch goal. If it's not a good time for you, that's totally okay too. The next one will come along and I'll let you know when that happens. But I think you'd be awesome at this if you have the bandwidth. As a mother, things that you can do is to counter this is to signal that you really are committed to your career. Talk about your short-term and long-term goals and ask your supervisor how you can meet them. You should highlight like any aspects of yourself that would demonstrate that you're committed. Like if your partner is willing to relocate with you. A lot of people assume that male partners won't do that. And if you're the primary earner in your family, you should make that clear too. A lot of times people assume that the male is the primary earner and reduce the number of opportunities and give them to a man instead. On the flip side, the other stereotype is the workaholic mother. There's this assumption that mothers who are dedicated to their jobs are bad mothers and therefore bad people. So people say things like, I don't know how much you can work so much. My wife would never spend so much time away from our kids. How do you get it done? You must be so overwhelmed. Why would you want to come back to work when you have babies at home? So one polite response is, I'm sure that that's right for your family, but I'm doing what's right for my family. Rhea, I like your response better. Well, obviously your wife is a better mother than I am.
Well, I don't. People, that really does shut up a room.
I hope I'm that sassy if I ever have kids. I think the important thing here, though, is that you don't hold yourself to an unrealistic standard. Focus on what you're doing right for your family, and don't judge yourself so harshly. Last thing about parents, fatherhood tends to help men out. They tend to get increased salaries and decreased performance expectations. It goes back to the primary earner thing. Men are actually rewarded when they ask for flexible schedules, but women are definitely penalized for asking. The best organizational solutions for these maternal wall biases are going to help men as much as they help women. If, like, for example, if you offer a gradual return to work plan after parental leave, or you allow part-time work with proportional pay, proportional benefits, and proportional timeline for advancement. Because that is a big one, is coming back to work part-time and not moving forward in your career after that. And I think the most important thing is creating a climate where it's okay for everyone to take parental leave. And you should model that at the top of your organization. If you're in a senior position, let other people know when you're leaving the office specifically for a family matter. Instead of just saying, I'm going to be at the office, say, I'm going this afternoon say, I'm going to go watch my kid's softball game, and just make it okay to talk about the fact that you have kids and that sometimes you do stuff for them and you do stuff with them. So yeah, any comments or questions about?
Nothing so far.
Okay, good. So the last pattern of bias that I want to talk about is the tug of war. And it occurs when this gender bias fuels conflict amongst women. So in a lot of organizations, opportunities for women, it's a zero-sum game. If one woman gets the position, then another woman won't. And so that breeds a lot of competition amongst the women. That's a recipe for what a lot of people call the queen bee syndrome, which is usually characterized by, as a personality problem, something wrong with that woman, that queen bee. But really, it's a symptom of gender bias in that workplace environment. Women who experience bias early in their careers have a tendency to distance themselves from other women. Marissa Mayer is a good example. When she was still a programmer at Google, she was asked, what is it like to be a female programmer? And she said, I'm not a girl at Google. I'm a geek at Google. She distanced herself from what was the out group, girls, and identified herself as a member of the in group, geeks. And some people might say, oh, she's being a queen bee, but really she understood that there's gender bias in her environment, and it was in her best interests to distance herself from that out group of other women. So Madeleine Albright, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. I really like that quote. You see a lot of pass-through of the three biases I talked about already in the tug of war bias pattern. So for example, prove it again. More experienced women will say something like, I expect women to achieve high standards. I don't want there to be any criticism of their work. I had to fight my way to the top, and so younger women need to do that too. And the justification will be something like, I want you, I'm toughening you up because this is what you have to do to succeed here. For tightrope bias, often this is kind of more generational. Younger women sometimes fault older women for being more masculine, and older women think that younger women are a bit too girly. Women in their who are currently in their 50s and 60s in traditionally male careers, they were coming up in a time that the only way to succeed was to assimilate into the culture, into what guys were doing. Also, they may just feel more comfortable that way. But women who are younger, 20, 30 years younger, feel way more comfortable in their femininity, and they see acting girly as a part of equality. You should be able to present yourself with your true identity. And this is a success that, all kinds of women with all kinds of personalities are entering traditionally male careers. But there's this conflict that older women think, oh, you're never going to make it, you're never going to be taken seriously if you act all girly. And, younger women think, oh, you all turned into dudes. I don't want that life. And it can cause a lot of tension between the generations.
So I do have a question here at this point. So
Yeah.
What do you think about use of the phrase like a girl, and how people use that to be insulting, and how do you recommend turning that into something positive?
I think it's one of those things that we have to take back. I think like a girl is awesome, like if I'm saying it, but it's probably not awesome if some person is saying it in anger. Uh, I, I don't think that there are a lot of things that you do like a girl. You do, you know, like you don't really throw like a girl. You either throw your ball accurately or you don't. It doesn't really have anything to do with gender. So unless you're saying like a girl to be mean like awesome, then it is a problematic phrase.
So I actually do kind of the opposite. When I see someone do something tough or strong or assertive or whatever, I will say, "Oh, you did that like a girl." And, and not a single person in my life has ever challenged me on that. All of them are like, "Oh, I see what she did there." So I don't even wait for somebody else to use it as a negative. I insert it as a positive. I even say the phrase cowgirl up instead of cowboy up. And, sometimes I get a little smirk or I get a whatever. No one's ever said, "Oh, you said that wrong." No, I didn't. I said it exactly right.
Yeah, I, I think it can be a good phrase. Um, so the other pass through that happens is for the maternal wall. Um, so mothers can kind of be unsupportive of other women who don't have children. Single women in their 30s do the most unpaid overtime of any age or gender group. Um, Single women without children are more likely to report that they are expected to sacrifice family or personal time to be respected at work. Um, that's definitely an issue for me as a single woman, that I feel like it's hard for me to ask someone to swap for an on-call rotation, or if somebody needs some help, I feel like I should be the first one to volunteer to take somebody else's shift, because I have no life, I guess. And so I look like a not team player if I'm just doing nothing. So guys, when they don't have kids, they're seen as bachelors. They're playing the field. They need time to date. But like I said, women are who don't have kids are essentially spinsters. Um, when Janet Napolitano was being nominated for Secretary of Homeland Security, the governor of Pennsylvania said, "Oh, Janet's perfect for that job, because for that job, you have to have no life. And Janet has no family. Perfect. She can devote literally 19, 20 hours a day to this job." And so there is this expectation that single women have to do more. So how do you combat the tug of war? First, kind of resist the urge to judge other women. This is something that sometimes I find hard to do. Other women receive pressures of gender bias too, and they're doing the best that they can, and they're making the best decisions they have for their situation. When you have a negative response to another woman, maybe ask yourself, what are specific examples of why I don't like her? Would I have the same reaction if a guy did the same thing? And, just really try to figure out whether gender is part of why you don't like that woman. And then if you do have a problem with another woman, be direct. Try to turn that enemy into an ally. Maybe meet with her privately and say something like, "I think sometimes you're not seeing me in the best light. I would really like to have a great relationship with you. Can you tell me if we did something that got us off on the wrong foot?" Just try to reset and create a good environment for each other. Another one is be respectful of other women's experiences. Like I said before, a lot of times situations are about generations as much as they are about gender. Older women might think, hey, I paid my dues. Young women should do the same. But why did you do all of that trailblazing? It was to create a better experience for the next generation. Younger women might think that older women are overly assertive, too brash, and not realize that these older women had to do a lot to create a path for these younger women. Also, senior women probably in an organization probably don't have as much power as the more junior women think they do. And so they can't just spend their capital all over the place, their political capital. Make sure that women without kids don't carry an unequal burden. Make sure that in any given group that the extended hours, weekends, holiday work are distributed fairly. And advocate for other women. But recognize that there are limits to sisterhood. Do men always support other men? Nope. However, supporting other women is a really good way to network, and it's a good way to make a better climate. So if you're in a meeting and you notice another woman's ideas being stolen, try that. Try to say something like, "Great idea! I loved it when she brought it up, and I'm so glad that you're reiterating it." I know we're kind of getting long for time, but so organizational change. Basically, if you want to do this at an organizational level, there are 4 steps. Step 1 is, collect data about whatever gender bias you think is playing a role in your workplace. Basically the patterns we talked about today. Step 2 is identify specific ways that you can measure gender bias. For example, if you have a problem with office housework, you might come up with lists where you divide up the low profile and the high profile tasks and figure out what is the percentage of time that different people are spending on these different kinds of tasks. And if you see a disparity, you kind of go to step 3 and experiment. Try to figure out what interrupter would maybe change things, swing the numbers to something you want more. The ideal interrupter is going to be something that's easy to do and something that's not going to require any kind of special training on gender bias for you to implement. There are four areas that you probably want to focus on when you find evidence of bias: hiring, assignments that people are getting, performance valuations, and what promotion and compensation look like. And then, so once you've experimented on this, you just kind of throw some spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, and keep on trying. So here's some resources, some of the references to the things we talked about today. I will update these slides to include the links to the videos and send you the slide deck so that people can watch the other videos if they'd like.
Yes, I was going to try to get to this before we run out of time. Do you have any advice for dealing with, let me get this right, for combating ageism among women? And I will add, it's not in the question, but I will add, I think this goes both ways. Ageism against young women and ageism against older women.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? So how to combat?
Any suggestions for combating ageism among women? Like, what do you do?
I think it's kind of like if we're talking about women who are being ageist against one another, it's kind of acknowledging what each brings to the board or brings to the table. Like it's really good to know women who have different experiences than yours. I'm on the younger side of where I work, and I just it's so interesting to talk to the women who have more experience. And so I hope that they find my perspective interesting too. And so I guess I don't know exactly what I would need a more specific example of what sort of ageism one is experiencing to.
Okay. I'm not gonna. We don't really have time for terribly much follow-up, but I will say that, and I do this, and I catch myself not expecting a lot from the 23-year-olds in my office because they're so much closer to the age of my daughter. Or the opposite is true of a woman who is older. I think I might not expect her to be very technical because I would think of, my boyfriend's mom who can't figure out how to do something on her iPhone. So I think it's behaviors like that. And I don't necessarily know that those are specific to women because I don't really expect a whole lot from the 23-year-old just got out of college guys either. Mm-hmm. But yeah. Okay. So no, that's all for questions. There's no more.
All right, great.
So let me take presenter back from you. If anybody on the call is attending Summit, whether you already have or have not registered, please know that there is a WIT happy hour that we're having on Tuesday from 4 to 6, which is before the welcome orientation. So you'll have a link will go out in the newsletter. We've tweeted about it. And I'll make sure that it gets put up on the wit.pass.org webpage so that you can access it from there. But you can also, from pass.org, there's a whole page to after hours activities, both official pass activities and non-official pass activities. And of course, if you have any questions, you could always email us at passwit@sequelpass.org as well. So, Andrea, thank you very, very much for presenting today. I really, really appreciate it. If you'll email me the slide deck, I'll make sure that we have that available. And I will have this video uploaded to YouTube, hopefully by the close of business on the East Coast today. So thank you very, very much, everybody, for attending, and we will see you next month.